Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head, and in this episode, I'm talking to Brock Eide. Along with Fernette Eide, he is the author of the Dyslexic Advantage. This is a paradigm-shifting book that describes the neuroscience behind dyslexia and its unique brain structure. Now, 12 years on from its first publication, they have an updated and revised edition. Includes new research, clarifies dyslexic strengths, and comes with new insights. As always, I'll put links to the book as well as other things we talk about in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Brock.
Thanks very much, Matt. Glad to be here.
Excellent. So you're currently talking to me from London now because you're doing a bit of a tour to promote the book in the UK.
That's right.
But what I want to start with really is that you started off as physicians before you got to the world of dyslexia. So what did pique your interest in becoming a physician in the first place?
So I think wanting to become a doctor was sort of just a lifetime thing for me. I remember as a child, I don't know if it was maybe the esteem that my parents held the doctors in was part of it, but I was also fascinated by the fact that when something went wrong, that was the person that you went to fix you up and patch you up.
Yeah.
I was always interested in science, interested in the human body, and interested in people and their problems. And it just seemed like a great field for me. Fernette's father was a doctor, and her grandfather was a doctor, and her great-grandfather was a doctor. So it was a pretty straightforward.
So she didn't walk in one day and go, I want to be an engineer. So that does bring me on to Fernette. How did the two of you meet?
So we met when we were medical interns at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia is the city of brotherly love by etymology, but it's also pretty good for meeting your spouse.
I see. So you're doing your internship, meet Fernette. Did you then start working together straight away, or did you have your own careers before you sort of started putting things together?
Yeah, it really took us. It took us probably 10 years before we started working together. So Fernette was training as a neurologist, and their first year before they began doing neurological brain specialization, they actually learned to be a real doctor and do general internship. And that was the year that we met. So I continued on with medical training, and actually initially was training to be a cardiologist.
Oh, wow.
But a series of health problems got me out of cardiology and on a different track with more general medicine and then philosophy of medicine and medical ethics. And Fernette continued on with neurology and was a junior faculty member at the University of Chicago in the Department of Neurology. And at that time, we started having children, and our children grew to the age where they started attending school, and we started finding out that everything wasn't going exactly the way it's told you that it's going to go in the books. And we began looking to try to understand what was going on with our children, and that was really the birth of our interest in learning differences. And after probably about 4 or 5 years of that, we decided to make a full-time career out of that and opened up our clinic together.
Okay, so you obviously, how much did you know about dyslexia before you had children and then found out they had neurodiversity? Was it something you were aware of during your medical career and medical learning?
No, we really didn't have any training on it at all. And it's actually ironic because dyslexia runs heavily in my family. But
oh, really?
Yeah, I had never realized when I was younger that actually my grandmother was very dyslexic. So I would get these Christmas messages from her every year where she would spell my name differently every single year. I was Brooke, I was Brock, I was BRO with a K, I was with a C, with every other thing. And her son, my father, was also very dyslexic. He was an accountant, a certified public accountant who was very successful in his business activities. But I got a hold of his college report cards once, and he had straight A's in accounting and straight D's, and basically all of his humanities distribution courses and English
Right.
and remedial writing and all this sort of stuff. And we always thought of these things with my father as being sort of peculiarities. He was a very kind of physically brave man, but the only time I ever saw him show real signs of fear was when someone asked him to read something out loud. So, read to us before going to bed, or read something at a family occasion, with the night before Christmas poem or something like that. And he would begin trembling. And, I could never figure out why. The first book I ever saw him read was when he was 40 years old. And
wow.
I was probably 12 or 13 at that time. It was the first time he ever read a book for pleasure. So, we didn't really have a name for dyslexia at that time. We didn't study dyslexia during our medical school years.
Okay.
I had a few peculiarities. When I was young, I had a lot of visual problems reading, where the letters would bounce around on the page when the print got too small and that sort of thing. And I read very slowly, but I read accurately and never encountered serious academic problems, though on the college tests, I would never finish the reading sections and things like that. But it wasn't bad enough to really, lead me to get identified or diagnosed. But then when we had children, they had more significant challenges with learning to read and with spelling and that sort of thing. And that was when we began learning about dyslexia.
Okay. And do you think, was there any dyslexia on Fernette's side of the family, just to kind of close this loop off once you started learning?
Yeah, no, not dyslexia, but they're not exactly neurotypical either. So there are some things I think that are probably related to dyspraxia and procedural learning, and some elements along with processing speed and potentially some attention-related issues too. So the convergence of our two rivers made a mighty flood, as they say.
Yes,
the young ones. But they inherited a lot of good things from both sides as well. So we're very happy about that.
Good. So how many children do you have, just to kind of paint the picture?
We have two. We lost one to cancer. The other one is now 28 and a sort of budding children's book artist. So he's got a little book agent running around New York trying to sell one of his projects now. So we're very excited about his career.
Okay, so you sent both kids off to school and started to sense that one of them was struggling in academia. What then kind of led you down the path that this might be dyslexia, or you discovered this thing called dyslexia? Because it must be coming home with school reports and struggling with handwriting and all this stuff we know that young dyslexics struggle with when they start school. But what really started ringing bells in your head and leading you down the path?
It was just I think the discrepancy between their ability to obviously think and speak and reason and be very smart young people, their love of being read to, their love of stories, their love of creating their own stories, but then their difficulty then in engaging with printed text, and also then on the written side, just the difficulties learning how to spell and to represent sounds and letters, and that was really pretty unexpected to us, because neither one of us had problems that were significant enough to come to attention. I've always been a flamboyantly bad speller. I think the nicest comment I ever got from an English professor was, "It's a pity that your spelling can't keep up with your ideas."
Oh.
I took that as a great compliment. But neither one of us, neither Fernette nor I, had enough problems kind of in the early years that we sort of came to attention. So we weren't expecting that our kids would show special challenges, but it just goes to show the general level of ignorance with which we were educated regarding dyslexia and regarding learning in general.
Yes. Yeah, and I can imagine that you kind of don't know what's going on. But what was your kind of first sort of, should we say, intervention with your children? Was it something one of the teachers recommended, or was it something you guys were reading about and thinking, this might help them out?
Yeah, it was really things that we ended up finding because I think, like many parents, the first stop was with the pediatrician, and I don't know why we expected the pediatrician who went to the same medical schools and did all the same things we did was going to know anything about dyslexia, but that was really barking up the wrong tree. And then we went to the educators and the teachers and asked what they thought was going on, and they were pretty much, they're doing fine, they're making progress, they'll grow out of it, sort of thing. But it was clear to us that the discrepancy between what they were able to do orally and what they were able to do conceptually, and their ability to read and write was just it was a phenomenon in need of an explanation. And and so we went looking ourselves, and because we had access to the basic scientific literatures and to the primary literatures, it didn't take us too long to discover these other things. And I think one of the things that was interesting is that some of the challenges manifested in different ways with our son and our daughter. So our son had a lot of difficulties with auditory processing, and it was clear that his ability to process spoken language was impacted in certain environments. So if there was background noise, if there were other things going on, he was really impaired with how he heard. Our daughter didn't so much have background noise problems, but she had phoneme awareness problems. And so she would, both when she was speaking and when she was listening, she would make a lot of substitutions when she was younger, and just clearly mishear sounds. And, when you're 3 or 4 and, you're kind of making these subtle modifications to words, it's a little bit cute. When you're 5 and 6 and 7 and you're continually doing that, it starts to get, to be an area of concern even for parents who don't know what they're doing. And so, that was when we really started investigating these things and finding that these things were signs of other things. But, when you go approach an audiologist as a parent to try to figure out what this hearing issue is going on, they'll have one language to speak about it with, and a language specialist will have another one, and a reading specialist will have another one. And it just occurred to us after a while that there weren't many people that were bringing all of these approaches together and the things that were known in these different specialties and combining them. So I think that was our motivation for wanting to do that ourselves, to be a conduit for parents that were facing these challenging kinds of things, because nobody just has a reading problem, and nobody just has a hearing problem. The problems overlap in all these different areas.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, was it your son or daughter you noticed dyslexia in first?
Our son first, just because he was older. Our daughter was more classically dyslexic, where our son was really sort of dyslexic, dyspraxic. And as time has gone on, he was able to master basic phonics fairly well once he got sort of into his late single digit, early teen years. And so now he doesn't really show many signs at all. He's able to, he has good phonological skills. He can spell well and other things, whereas our daughter was really much more classically dyslexic in terms of spelling and decoding and those kinds of things.
So this, obviously, you're saying you've got all these multiple resources, and the problem kind of touches all these multiple resources, and they all talk in different languages. Did that lead you and Fernette to start applying your medical brain to this to try and pull all this information together? And how did that first look like in the early days?
Yeah, it absolutely did. And, it just involved first us just kind of reading our brains out. And, I remember waking up every morning because, Fernette was the typical concerned mother, in addition to being a professor of neurology. And she would be staying up at night reading, things online until 2 or 3 in the morning and looking for books and whatever. And I remember waking up every morning and having a new report on the things all the things she'd read after I'd gone to sleep that night. And I would sort of follow up, but she was the sort of classic broad broad sweeper who would find all the things of relevance, and then I would kind of follow after her on the interesting leads and sort of do the deep dive. And that's kind of the way we've operated ever since as well. And it worked out really well in terms of finding resources and approaches to help our children. And that was really what got us into this. And then just the recognition from both the statistics in general, and then just our discussions with other parents that there were so many other people in the same situation. And of course, this was still the fairly early years of the internet in the late 90s. And so we were meeting other parents on chat groups and online groups that were organizing around some of these issues. And we just thought there was a real need. And it was an area that was fascinating to us as well as being personally relevant. And so that just got us deeper and deeper and deeper in. And that led us eventually to doing this full time.
Yes. And I guess you had the perfect workshop with two children to try some of the techniques on. Were there certain ones you were finding worked better for your son and your daughter, or you're always finding there were a blend needed all the time?
Yeah, I think there were certainly different things that worked for each. Our son had a very narrow working memory span, and his procedural problems were super challenging as well. So anything that involved more drill type work just did nothing for him at all. Everything had to be approached through understanding and through comprehension. Whereas our daughter was a better traditional learner in that sense. She could learn through practice, and rote things worked a little better for her. So they really, I think, were fairly rarely helped by the same things. They were, I think, a good introduction to this field also, by reinforcing the fact that we're not just talking about always a single thing when we're talking about dyslexia, but as we've talked about in the most recent update of our book, dyslexia is kind of a spectrum of spectrums, that, and a multidimensional system where you're not just varying in your position on a single spectrum, but on multiple spectra. And that was really what we found early on with our own children.
Yeah, something I've said quite a lot with different podcast guests is like no two dyslexics are the same. So
yes.
as much as they're common rhythmic beats, it all need different kind of things to help us along. As you started applying these techniques to your children, did you start seeing their grades rocket up? Did that kind of give you quite a nice feedback loop then?
Our son was impacted enough that we ended up homeschooling him very early on. So, and to be honest, in terms of academic progress in sort of basic skills things, we didn't see much until he was in his early teen years, probably 15 or 16, before he was able to really write and do mathematics and things like that. But at the same time, his higher level cognitive abilities were really quite good. And he was doing actually some college level coursework by the time he was 11 or 12 online. And so he was able to reason. He was able to think creatively. He was able to do a lot of these higher cognitive things quite early, but there was just an enormous gap between those and his ability to do anything that involved steps, anything that involved rote learning, anything that involved learning through practice. And so I think he was a great introduction into the fact that learning, long-term learning, really can be achieved through different systems. Whereas our daughter did begin to academically progress early and was quite good at mathematics. So it's interesting that, like many dyslexic students, she succeeded primarily through instruction plus bribery. So very strong interest-based learner, and one of the things that really interested her very much was getting financial rewards. So they were not big, but they involved gamification, so that there were pluses for success and minuses for mistakes. And so I remember the joy on her face before we initiated the give and take program, when she came to us and said, "Wow, I got 50% right. That's pretty good, huh?" So we said, well, we can aim a little higher than that. So if you get a little higher, you'll do a little better next time. And so she ended up having a deep interest in learning game theory, actually. So she was She was very interested in that sort of risk analysis, give and take sort of thing.
Yeah. I like that. Instruction plus bribery. Brilliant. Which chapter is that in? Instruction plus bribery.
That's the next book, I think.
Well, you now got a name for it. So, yourself and Fernette now find yourself within the world of dyslexia. You've got your own business running on it. Let's sort of skip along to, well, let's jump across the stones that got you to actually releasing a book on dyslexia. How was the business looking at before then, and what then started to think, well, maybe I should put this into a book?
Yeah, so initially we weren't even entirely specialized on dyslexia. We were just interested in helping people with learning challenges in general. I think what drew us specifically to dyslexia over time, though, and it's really been our main focus for the last probably 13, 14 years, was that just the simple observation that we weren't simply seeing the same set of challenges over and over again, or the same range of challenges. Not that we were seeing the same ones in every child, as we've already talked about, but the same basic set of challenges. We were also seeing the same sets of strengths, not just in the children, but also in the families. And I think we were aided to some extent by our practice structure, because there were two of us. One of us spent an awful lot of time sitting and talking to the parents and the families when the other was in the room examining the child, and then we'd swap off and each do the other thing. So I think we ended up just doing much more historical background work with the families and hearing the family stories much more. And it was clear to us that we were seeing these patterns of strengths over and over and over again, both in the children and in the parents. And that was what led us to kind of dive into the scientific and medical literature and look and see if there was any support elsewhere for this notion that there are advantages that are linked to dyslexia, or if there are explanations in terms of brain structure or in terms of the cognitive research on dyslexia that might suggest that there was a reason to think that dyslexic people might have these advantages. And it was the fact that we were able to find those kinds of things that led us to write the book.
Yes. Yeah. So let's go, because the book is why you're here, to be honest. So let's start diving into the book. How long did it take you to write, and how did you and Fernette split the kind of task of writing up? Because obviously Fernette's more into the neuroscience than you are anyway. So is she the one that does all the deep work into the detail? How does it look when you're writing it?
No, we split it up. So during my medical training, I did 7 years in basic science research. So I'm a pretty wonky person also. But basically the way that the book writing came down. So this was the second book that we published, and we sort of worked out our cooperative methodology on the first one. And what she's really good at is finding connections between things in the literature and kind of doing a big sweeping search of things and finding all the sort of possibly relevant things and sweeping that in. And then I'm good at sort of organizing things and systematizing things and creating a structure for them. and also storytelling. So I did an awful lot of writing earlier in my career, also that was a little bit more narrative in format. And so, I'm pretty much the guy that puts all the words onto the page. But before any word goes down, we'll both have read all of the relevant papers and discussed them and thought through the ideas. So Fernette's the one, for example, that came up with the whole mind strength concept. And then I sort of organized things onto paper. I think in terms of kind of our recent things, the things dealing with the neural systematization things in terms of the connection of the mind strengths that we talked about in the other book. Some of that was a little bit more my work this time, but Fernette's also, I think, much better in terms of the practical clinical applications of things. She's really, I think that's her strongly maternal side. And she really thinks in terms of what all this means for people, how to help. She's much better at keeping up with the assistive technology things and the classroom, what's going on in the classrooms at typical schools, and the educational techniques and things like that, where I think I get a little bit more theoretical on things at times.
Yeah.
So it's been a naturally good partnership. I think we each end up with our own things because of what we love to do, rather than because the other one just doesn't want to do it or is pushing us in that direction. So
yeah, no, that's cool. It's great that the two of you can work as a team and have different strengths to build into it, because that just ultimately builds a better book at that point, doesn't it? So if anybody's listening who hasn't read Dyslexic Advantage or listened to it, if you can get it downloaded on Audible, just step us through what sort of things are touched on it. Like a brief sort of, I guess, what's written on the back cover kind of thing.
Yeah, so I think the basic, the biggest big picture explanation of what the book is about, it really presents the notion that dyslexia is not fundamentally best understood as a disability, but what it really represents is a kind of brain specialization in certain kinds of functions that bring about strengths as well as challenges. And the reason that so many people are dyslexic is because there's an advantage to the human population of having a significant number of people who are wired this way. They create a cooperative advantage for human society as a whole by the strengths that they bring and the ability to compensate for some weaknesses that people have because they focus too well and because they're too organized, that they miss out on the opportunities to be creative and to think in different ways and to take new approaches. So that's really the message of the book.
So that's kind of the back cover synopsis of the book. But you are quite unique at that point in time in seeing these advantages. So how were you able to pull everything together from the literature to start, I guess, seeing the pattern recognition, which is a dyslexic student for a start, that started you thinking, well, actually, this is not a deficit thing or anything like that. We are now seeing strengths of dyslexia and pulling it all together into sort of a coherent thought.
Yeah. So, the beginning of all this, I remember when we actually had the thought of trying to organize and systematize our observations, that we actually went up to, we're from Seattle, of course, so we went up to a Starbucks and just bought a couple of lattes and went and sat down at a table outside. It was that's atypical for Seattle, but the weather was good enough that day that we could sit outside, and we just started talking about all of the dyslexic people that we worked with and all of the strengths that they showed. And once we made the list, we went through and tried to see if they seemed to organize themselves in certain ways. And we came up with these 4 patterns around spatial reasoning, around connection making, around storytelling, and around future prediction. And then Fernette was the one who came up with the whole mind concept for that. And we then at that point wanted to see if there was any reason to think that these patterns had any relevance or any coherence aside just from our own perception of them hanging together. And so we looked basically at three different levels in the research literature. We looked at research on dyslexic brain structure and function, brain structure initially. So were there things about dyslexic brains and the way that they were put together that suggested that they might show a strength challenge correspondence? There might be single brain differences that could explain both benefits and challenges arising from those single benefits, because in science you're always looking for a simple explanation. So rather than looking for multiple things happening simultaneously at the same time, you don't want a theory that requires you to have two lightning strikes at the same instant. You want to base it on one. At the second level, we looked at the cognitive level, or at the brain functional levels. So things that involve brain processing or the ability to perform different kinds of cognitive tasks. And we looked in that literature to see if there were things that supported the different strength patterns that we had found. And then we looked also at kind of the real world literature. So there's literature that looks at what dyslexic people have achieved in life, what kinds of careers they've gravitated into, what sort of schooling programs they pursue, and look to see if there was evidence supporting these kinds of categories based on those sorts of differences. And the idea was that we were creating a sort of a three-dimensional matrix. And if we could see the same talent sets going through those three levels, kind of mutually supporting each other, then that would be a very high indication, a very strong indication that we were looking at real patterns and not simply at things we made up. And we found those for each of the mind strengths.
Okay, that's cool. And did this epiphany moment over coffee, the fuel of the Renaissance? It's always good. What was the response to that at the time? The book had come out, and at the time, I understand it's quite novel thinking. Did you get much pushback in response to it?
Actually, much less than we anticipated.
Oh, and really?
So there's I think two questions, two ways to ask the question. One where we treated in a friendly and respectful manner by the academic research community. To that, definitely yes. We've had a lot of people that have invited us to do things, and we organized a number of conferences around dyslexic strengths and had many very, very eminent and highly qualified people come from the academy to participate in those. So we've been treated very respectfully and very collegially by people in the academy. In terms of have we seen as much generation of other people doing research on the dyslexic strengths as we would like, I think there the answer is no. I would qualify that by saying that the older generation, which now very sadly includes us because of the way it works, we were the young mavericks 12 years ago. We're now entering the fuddy-duddy stage of our careers. People our age, I think, have not picked up the banner, but we're seeing many people that are, that have gone through training during years where our book was already out there, that have been eager to begin studying these things. And so we're seeing a lot more work that's being done by younger people. And, Max Planck, the physicist and really one of the originators of quantum theory, had this wonderful, kind of morbid actually, saying that science advances one funeral at a time. And it's just a recognition of the fact that old dogs don't learn new tricks, and that scientific theories generally change as one generation passes off the scene and another generation comes on who's more open to new ideas. And I think that's what we're really witnessing, that as the years go by and these things become more obvious, not just through the research that's done within the dyslexia community, but in the research in related fields. So creativity studies, I think over the last 10 years has been a huge one. And just the system networks around episodic memory has been an incredibly rich research area over the last 12 years. And as people within the dyslexia field finally become aware of these things, which really haven't been on anybody's radar at all, I think there's just no way that they'll not become more interested in this, because the case for the connection between dyslexia and these kinds of strengths has become dramatically stronger in the last 12 years. And I think it's really undeniable at this point.
It is. And the general conversation around neurodiversity and particularly dyslexia has really shifted to the fact that we're openly posting on social media platform about dyslexic strengths, which must excite you very much, I would have thought.
Yes. And, we've seen other changes in the last 12 years that I think are equally encouraging. So when we were writing the first edition of the book, we made a very strong effort to try to find as many women as we could to interview, and also to reach out to people in underrepresented minority groups to get them to participate. And we were not able to get very many folks in those categories to participate. And the traditional response was, I already have these other strikes against me, and I just don't have the social capital to expend by being public about my dyslexia at this time, because I just don't think that that we can do all this. And I think there's been some obviously public movement in terms of advances for ethnic minorities and women in the last 12 years. But the responses that we received this time, I think, were even greater than we would expect based on those advances by themselves, and also represent the changing in people's willingness to be seen as being dyslexic now. I think people are, in fact, more comfortable with that. I think it's not perceived as much of a stigma as it has been generally, although there still are many cases where people do experience a sense of stigma. But I think we're seeing the beginnings of a change where more people are willing to talk about being dyslexic themselves.
Yes, yeah, and I've certainly found actually during my sort of career and stuff that being open about being dyslexic has helped my career greatly. It's funny how the mind shift around it from being this thing you hide and don't want to talk about to actually something that's just part of me changes other things as we go along.
Yeah, and I think that's a wonderful thing. We found it just extremely encouraging. And, it's nice to think that our book might have played a part in that. It's clear that the willingness of people like Richard Branson to come out and talk about being dyslexic, and other popular celebrities and media figures. The work of other organizations and groups besides our Dyslexic Advantage organization, but groups like Made by Dyslexia and the British Dyslexia Association over here has done great work for a long time. The Dyslexia Arts Trust, there have been a number of really great groups in the United Kingdom that have, over the years, popularized this notion that there is a connection between dyslexia and talent. So we certainly haven't been alone in that field, but it's nice to see that the momentum seems to be building.
Yeah, definitely. And it just seems to be, the ball's getting stronger all the time, I think. I started a new job recently and everybody's so sort of welcoming of it. And I remember when I first started my career, and I worked in STEM, so it's more likely there anyway. It's like, wow, this is different, how it sort of walked through. I mean, you can't miss it on my CV. The fact I present this podcast gives it away, I suppose. So what led you to build up to writing the second edition? Why did you sort of think, this needs an update?
There was just so much new research that was relevant to understanding dyslexic strengths and the mind strengths. And just about all of it, there's been some dyslexia-related research directly that's been important, and we talk about that in the book. But there was even more research outside of the dyslexia area that was relevant to the mind strengths. And it really was not on anybody else's radar. And we knew that if we didn't do it, nobody else would do it either.
Okay.
It was all that research around creativity, around the use of episodic memory. I think the big thing for us was that it became obvious that the mind strengths had been revealed by the research that had taken place in the intervening years as being four manifestations of the same underlying set of cognitive systems and networks and different abilities. So, just like with a tool, a driver for a drill, you can put a drill head on it, or you can put a screwdriver head on it, or a polisher, or a sander, or any kind of a tool, but it's the same power source that drives all of those. And the function that you get out of it just depends on what you're linking it to. In the cases of the mind strengths, it really looks at like whether you're getting M strength, spatial reasoning, or I strength, ability to think in connections and systems, N strength, ability to think in stories, T strength, ability to make predictions. All of those things are driven by the same ability to use personal memory to create complex mental simulations. So as opposed to using step-by-step reasoning, rules, formulas, equations to do your reasoning, you're actually kind of creating mental scenarios in mind and envisioning them. It's the reason why show your work, explain in words exactly what went on in your thinking to get you to that point is not a simple process to do, because you're not going through steps. You're not doing something in a linear fashion. You're actually envisioning something, and it's a very different process.
Yes, you are right, and it's quite interesting how it all comes together, doesn't it? With like doing stuff where you can go from A to Z and bounce off R and it back into C, because how a dyslexic brain's able to pull that together, and like my background in engineering, the amount of key people that have come along before me that have done that and worked out new things. And it's funny how the brain kind of works like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I imagine you must have seen this excitingly in your children when you were training them through it. Like, hey, this thing starts to happen. How did you come up with that? That's a brilliant idea, but
Yeah, and I think that one of the biggest challenges that we've seen with dyslexic people is, for example, we've talked a lot about entrepreneurship. Other people have talked a lot about entrepreneurship, and one of the big challenges that people in business in general have is that if you say, I know we should do this because I can see it. I have this image. I see how it all fits together, and I know it works, but I can't tell you exactly why I know that. You can get away with that if you're the boss, if you're the one who calls the shots, if you're the owner, if you're the founder, but not if you're the middle manager. And this is why we see so many people in entrepreneurship, number one, because of this talent set, this ability to see the future and envision opportunities other people miss. But we also see a lot of people in entrepreneurship because the people that have a business bent, people like my daughter, who are heavily motivated by rewards, know that they're not going to find success by becoming the mid-level manager at a mega company in many instances, and so they look for opportunities independently that they can exercise. This is the kind of thing that we hear again and again from the people that we work with, is that, I know where we need to go, but I just can't explain it to the other people. But a month or two later, after we've been doing this, now they see it too. And if we've always had this feeling where we may not be able to show everybody else the other steps, but we may be able to help legitimize the notion that somebody can have a completely rationally developed reason for pursuing a particular decision or a particular object or end that they can't explain to somebody else, but that they arrived at through a legitimate and trustworthy manner of thinking. So, there's kind of an asymmetry for people with dyslexia and non-dyslexic people, in that people with dyslexia typically understand what linear thinking looks like and what logical thinking looks like, and how it can be successful. But people who are very linear in their orientation do not have the ability to understand nonlinear thinking and to understand that it can be a legitimate form of reasoning and coming up with new ideas and decisions. So we've always wanted to try to redress that balance and help the linear people to understand that these people aren't just making blind leaps or having gut feelings about something, but that they're actually engaging in a process of using experience in a creative and cogent and trustworthy way.
Yes, and there's something really interesting you touch on there. I remember quite a few years ago trying to learn this. Once I'd sort of understood my own dyslexia, was that how do I explain stuff to people who aren't dyslexic? Because it's like my particular strength is being able to think in 3D and use a lot of visual skills. So I can have stuff on a CAD package screen and it's all over the place. And I'm like, well, it's going to do this by the end of it. All I need to do is get the program to do what I want. Great. And now it goes together. I can take it apart in my mind. But trying to explain to somebody else who does, I guess, think more linearly or is not a dyslexic person was a whole new skill set I had to learn.
Yeah, and that whole communication piece. But even to give you the time to pursue things that you can't show on the screen, if your boss has some trust in that, or your colleagues have some trust in that creates an entirely different environment than if they're really skeptical about anything that you do that you can't show yet.
Yes. Prove it. Well, give me a day. Mocking things up on other things to sort of show the thinking goes down quite well. So, based off the back of your book, really, I just thought there's a lot of sort of dyslexic coaching programs going around now. What are your thoughts on them? They've used various different methods to sort of highlight strengths I don't want to use the word weaknesses, but I guess that is the polar to strength, so it feels like the right language to use. Because we do know, being a dyslexic person, sometimes it's just things you're not great at, but then the mind is giving you other stuff that you are. And then there's all this coaching that hopefully brings up, well, either highlights the strength or helps use some of them strengths to kind of get through, take a different look on weaknesses of dyslexia. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the whole coaching field has made a lot of strides in recent years. I mean, I think it's wonderful in the United Kingdom that there are resources for employees, at least some resources provided by the government to get some training and to get some help with assistive technologies and things like that. I think we're probably still further along on helping to manage the weaknesses than we are in leveraging the strengths. And I think that the concept among employers that there is a identifiable set of strengths that we can begin to think about leveraging in our dyslexic employees is something that hasn't penetrated very far yet, because the resources haven't been there for employers to really understand that. That's certainly, I think, the area that going forward, Fernette and I are really thinking heavily about trying to make some impact on, because I think at this point, the whole neuroscience behind the dyslexic advantages is clear enough to be translated into language that has enough practical applications that it can be explained simply. It can be in some ways automated for managers. And put into sort of a no-fail kind of form where it doesn't require a lot of insight, but just development of practices to be able to accommodate these strengths and give people space to use them.
Yeah.
So we did put a whole chapter on work in this edition of the book to sort of begin the conversation of thinking about how to apply mind strengths in different settings. But I think there's an enormous amount of work that can be done. And all of this is going to involve actually listening and talking to people and finding out what they've learned already. Because we have, if 20% of people are dyslexic, or, somewhere between 10 and 20% of the people. We have, 500 million laboratories out there running this experiment.
Yes.
And the fact that there's so little interest in learning from those experiments or collecting the data is amazing. But just as an example, in the last month or two, we've been hearing back from so many people in the dyslexic community who've begun using ChatGPT.
Yes.
When people hear that, the sort of traditional educators and employers and whatever, the usual response is sort of horror that all dyslexic people are going to want to use ChatGPT to cheat and basically let it do all their work for them. And our response is always, well, you obviously don't know many dyslexic people if you think that they're going to let a machine speak for them. Because if there was ever a group of people that didn't want to let other people put words into their mouth, this is the group. It's people with ideas and opinions that they're wanting to get out, but they're having difficulty with the mechanical process of putting them in a linear form on the paper. And the amazingly creative ways that we've heard from the dyslexic folks that we work with to use ChatGPT, it's just astonishing. And none of them involve what anyone would recognize as cheating. It's things like, well, when my instructor asks me to do a 2-page essay on this sentence topic, my mind just goes in all directions, and I can't remotely think of what a 2-page essay would look like. Well, if you enter that into ChatGPT and say, show me what a 2-page essay for, at an 8th grade level or a 12th grade level or at a college level would look like on this topic, it'll spit it out. And what the student uses is not all the information in the paper, but the example of what the range, what the scope, what the level of detail is that will fit into 2 pages. And then they use that as a template to put their own ideas in. Or something like, these are the 10 ideas that I want to express in a 2-page paper written at such and such a level. Can you help me to write that? And so it's all their ideas. It's all their original thinking. It's all their content. And once it's down on the page, they can go back, reformat it, edit it, make changes or whatever. But it gets them off that blank page thing. It gets them off that, I could write a 300-page book on this, but I can't write a 2-page essay. Help me to understand what the size and the scope of the project I need to do is. And this is the kind of learning that needs to take place now, is really this kind of practical learning at kind of ground level in terms of actual daily tasks that people are facing.
Yes, definitely. And it is. And I think I haven't really dived into ChatGPT too much yet, but it's a really interesting bit of software. And I think it's interesting. I remember at uni not being able to get stuff out of my mind on the page. It's a motorway in my head, but it comes off a small B road or a small side road. And using like speech to text software to basically dump everything on. Then I had something to edit. If it's stuck in my brain, I can't do anything with it. It's just stuck in my head. And I think creative people are going to use ChatGPT creatively to be able to get through that kind of initial thing, hasn't it? Because from my understanding, you don't go, I want to write an essay on, I don't know, quantum theory. It would just spit 5,000 words out and you submit it the next day, because that's not what people are doing. But as you said, use that, and I've heard it's quite good for proofreading, spelling and grammar, and checking your language looks properly.
Okay, so what ChatGPT does is it provides organization for people who are creative, but there is no ChatGPT analog that provides creativity for people who are organized. So, this is really an opportunity for people with dyslexia, people with ADHD to get a leg up on, the less creative community. We'll put it that way. We were just giving a lecture up at GCHQ headquarters yesterday to their affinity group for people with dyslexia. And, it was fascinating hearing their perspective on this as well. In their intern group that they recruit, they have about 40% people with dyslexia, because the skills that they're looking for are skills of people who are good at thinking off the beaten tracks, of taking new perspectives, of looking at things from different perspectives and bringing new light on things. And, I think increasingly we're going to see that that all of the skills that can be automated will be automated. And it's going to be these things that only the human mind at this point can still do.
Yes,
that are,
yes.
I was sitting on the train coming into London today, across from a guy that was reading a manual on how to play the game Go, which is a very complex game. But even though it's an extremely complex game, it's reducible entirely to calculations. And for the first edition of our book, we talked to a guy named Demis Hassabis, who at that time was a postdoctoral fellow here at University College London, who was working on episodic memory, and he gave us a fantastic interview on episodic memory. And in the years after that, he left, formed a company called DeepMind, which was an artificial intelligence company, sold that to Google for several $100 million, joined Google as their director of artificial intelligence, and developed the program that allowed DeepMind to beat any Go champion in the world. And Demis himself actually was a 3-time, I think, world champion in the Go game. But that's a skill. Sitting across from this guy, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if he knows that there's no way he'll ever be able to beat the computer. It's like give you a sense of futility to engage in doing that. Why not read a book of poetry and go out and try to write some poems, because you'll never find a computer that can do that as well as you, because it will never have experienced the things that you've experienced. And I think we're reaching the stage where the premium for work is going to be with people who can bring value to things through creativity, through novelty, through making connections that other people haven't made before. And, that these other things that can be automated will be automated. And it's increasingly going to be important to learn how to leverage these strengths. And for people with dyslexia, use the technologies to get over the weaknesses, focus on your strengths, build those. Educators, education systems, start thinking in that direction, because there is literally next to no reason to be overstressed by the fact that you have some students who can't learn to read by age 9 or 10 or 11, because they can be supported in ways that will allow them to achieve even without that. It's good to continue trying to do that, because there still are prejudices. There still are situations where we need to learn to read now, but we should be moving in this direction of optimizing development of strengths and compensating for areas of challenge in ways that don't bring a lot of stress, that don't distract and detract from the ability to educate the strengths.
Yes, and it's going to be scary when people like Microsoft have that kind of algorithms and stuff in Microsoft Word, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I remember when speech to text was a specialist program, and now it's in Word. But yeah, you are right. And I remember seeing it years ago about other things when they bring automation into the workspace, like manufacturing and stuff. It's like that's where the economy will go. The economy will go to the mind economy with creativity, rather than just being able to sort of repeatedly do a task. And if you're a creative already and it's baked in, and it's a brave new world, isn't it?
That's right. ride the wave, because it's flowing in your direction. So.
Exactly. Right. So every guest that comes on this podcast, as we come towards a close, get 3 rapid fire questions. They are quick questions from me, but don't necessarily need rapid fire answers from yourself. Now, I'm going to be interested to say these ones, seeing as you wrote the book on dyslexia. But the first one is, what prejudice have you had about dyslexia that's been proven wrong?
That it's impossible to achieve outstanding success in even in workplace situations that generally require interaction with text without the ability, developing the ability to read yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
We've seen some people that were never able to learn to read at a competent level that nevertheless succeeded in highly literacy demanding fields using assistive technology.
Yeah. That's really cool. And the second question, rapid fire, that is if an A landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it?
I'd say these are the people whose brains have been organized to make them our explorers, our people that go out and learn new things, our creators, and are people that make us adaptable and help us to respond to change and challenge.
Yes. Yes, the explorers and creators comes up quite a lot. And I like that idea of it's maybe at a previous time it was the kind of the mindset to have, and then it's kind of changed as our world's changed, and maybe our world's changing back to that direction as technology assists us with things. Okay, last question of the podcast. And seeing as this podcast is called the Dyslexia Life Hack Show, what is your favorite dyslexic life hack? And you can't say read your book.
I think the best life hack is find the people who complement you with the this won't help to say, but complement with an E instead of an I, but the people who complete you rather than just surrounding yourself with other people who are just like you, even though they're often more entertaining. So I think one of the things one of the mistaken interpretations of our book is, I think, saying that dyslexia is just an all-around superior way to live. And for example, after the first book, we were contacted by a very successful sort of billionaire industrialist in the United States who was dyslexic and said, this is great. I think I'm going to start a new company that's going to employ all dyslexics. And we were like, well, for some of the jobs, yes. For other jobs, no. Because in reality, I think the beautiful message of neurodiversity that's coming out is that we're designed, we've been formed to work in teams, to work in partnerships, to work in pairs. And the people that we found that are the happiest, most well-adjusted, often are people that have found their teams. Now, that doesn't mean that every person in your life has to be different from you. We've seen many, many successful families and marriages with two dyslexic parents.
Yeah.
And, they find ways to do the organization functions and things like that. But then in other places in their life, they'll have people that are bring other organizational skills and things, and will profit that way. But in general, find use. Think about teams. Think about how you fit into teams. Think about the people you can bring in to help with things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the synergistic relationship that a group of people can have. We don't want an orchestra where everybody plays the violins.
Learn to communicate what you bring to the group as well.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
I think learn to be a good evangelist of your abilities is key.
Yes. Okay, so before we sign off, where can people find the Dyslexic Advantage book if they want to buy it or listen to it? And then where can people find you?
So, coming from Seattle, in addition to Starbucks, we have Amazon. So, Amazon.co.uk. But also, most standard booksellers will have it. For the audio version, I think it's being released in the United Kingdom on April 6th. So if you're better with recorded books, it'll be coming out soon. We tried hard to get a more animated, easier to listen to narrator this time around. I think complaints that I was a little bit flat last time, so hopefully that will be better. And for other information about what we do, dyslexicadvantage.org, our nonprofit organization website, is a great resource is a great resource.
Excellent. And I will put links to all of that in the show notes. And I'm particularly excited about the audio edition coming out in the UK because that tends to be how I consume that kind of information. So it's great you've got a good speaker. Did you approach Stephen Fry first of all?
I wish they didn't give us unlimited choice on that one. But I mean, there's so many great dyslexic people we could have had to read as well. Barry Oldman and Paul Bettany and these other dyslexic actors. But
yes, as I say, not unlimited budget, but it's great. So, well, that leads me to thank you very much for taking the time, Brock, to your very busy UK tour to come and talk to me on this. And it's been really fun talking to you and really interesting delving into all the background behind the book as well as what the book represents.
It's great. Thanks. It's been a real pleasure, Matt. Thanks for having me.
No problem at all. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen. I will speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.